All right, Chris, we are rocking and rolling. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. How are you, Matt?
Good. I really appreciate you joining me tonight. Been looking forward to this one. You've written a very interesting book that I want to get into. Maybe for the audience, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in these topics.
Sure. Yeah, by way of background, I'm usually not big to talk about my age, but because of this topic, it's fairly relevant. So I'm 55 years old, which means I was born in 69. So a lot of us, especially, the topic of my book, Roswell, we think, well, yeah, it's Roswell and it's always been, and it kind of always will be. But Roswell, granted, yes, it happened in 1947. It wasn't really a cultural touchstone until the 70s when Stanton Friedman started poking around in it. So, thus the
Hmm.
significance of being born in 69. And then I have had a very sci-fi oriented dad. So I always say, some people go fishing, some play baseball. My dad would, Christopher, come lay on the roof with me, just look at the sky, the stars. So it sounds a little trite, but that was the reality. That's what dad was into. So that's what I got into. And then won't bore your people with the details, but life goes on, and I'm a father of four now grown children. So,
Hmm.
in the meantime, is law school, and I own my own law firm, sitting here in my own courtroom tonight. So then what happens, I'm sure some of your listeners know this. One day your kids don't need you anymore and you have just tremendous amounts of free time. So I had long wanted to write a book. I've had this passion for UFOs since I was a kid, and I'm a trial lawyer by trade. So I forced the two of them together and wrote a pretty interesting book. So it's kind of me in a very nutshell there.
Very cool. And we're gonna get into your book here in a few minutes. But maybe you've had yourself kind of an extraordinary experience. And I heard you talk about this on Dan Harari's podcast. And I was hoping you would tell my audience as well, just a little bit about that experience.
Sure. And I do, as an attorney, and as I think people should try to do, I try to keep it very fact based. So in this story, right, I've got hard facts I can point to. And so without and trying to put in any hyperbole. So here's the story. It was 1991, so I was 22 years old, something about along those lines. And at the time, this is way before law school, and I was a new manager at a hotel, is what I was doing for a job. And kind of my mom had given me a book on how to be a good manager. And one of the tips in there was, well, when there's a work party, you should show up, all right, so people see you and maybe have a drink and then you leave, and that's so that they don't have to worry about the boss. So I'm all fired up. I'm like, yes, my big thing. So I go to this work party and I sat at a table. There were like three ladies there, and I had one beer off of a pitcher that they were drinking from as well. So I had one beer. I did my thing and I left. The next thing I knew, I woke up in my bed at home, and I walk upstairs. It's 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I had a roommate at the time, and he goes, "What did you do last night? What are you talking about?" And he goes, "You came home at 4, made a bunch of noise, went down to your bedroom. Had no recall. I went to work. I talked to the ladies who were at the bar. Kind of felt around. I left the bar at 9 o'clock. I have confirmation from three people. Yeah, you left at 9, said later, and off you went. And then confirmation from the roommate, I'm home at 4. The only memory that I have of anything in there, I would have flashes of a memory of being in a field, kind of along a tree line a bit. And when I went outside to get in my car that morning to go to work, up underneath my fenders and wheel wells, there was all this grass and tall grasses and whatnot.
Right.
So that's the story, and those are the absolute facts. And I try hard not to plug in those holes of some sexy details, but that's what occurred.
Right. And so let me just ask this question because this is where my mind
Yep.
was going. So you had grass all up underneath the car. It's not possible that you were in some sort of accident, right? Because the car would have had like bumps and bruises all over it. You probably would have had bumps and bruises all over you. You didn't have any of that, right?
No property damage to, there's the lawyer phrase for it. Yeah,
Just
no property.
grass.
Just, imagine if you went down in a ditch and you get it up in the wheel wells, and it was like that. And that was
And
it.
then how far away is it from this bar that you're at to your house? Are we talking like 10, 15 minutes? Are there even any grassy fields on the way home?
No, And that's a great question. And no, and I'm picturing the route in my head. The bar was in downtown. My house was no more than 10 minutes due west on I-235. To really
Hmm.
be in sort of, get out of suburbia and into sort of an area like that, you're talking probably 20, 25 minutes south. So,
Right.
but I don't know.
So you've got some serious missing time, several hours. What are we talking about? 5, 6 hours there of missing time, grass shoved up under the grate of your car. And no markings on you, nothing like that.
No,
And how
no,
did you feel the next morning? Did you? I mean, everyone's gonna think, oh, he was hungover or whatever, something like that. So somebody slipped him something. Did you feel groggy all next day or what?
no. And let me put everyone's mind at ease because I think the same thing, right? Oh, somebody roofied me or, whatever, because that
Right.
just happened. So first of all, I have actually, spent a couple Friday nights Googling roofies and whatnot. So this was 91. Roofies were a thing in 91, but they weren't out in our culture so much. Two,
Hmm.
they say if you get roofied, you feel just absolutely horribly sick for, a day
Hmm.
to following. I woke up, it felt like $1,000,000 other than I had no idea where I'd been, but no hangover, no sickness, and I was 22. I could handle a couple of beers, certainly.
Right. I'm sure.
Yeah. So it was just, who knows? And that's the kind of why, like I say, I can point to the facts of what happened, my own experience. Beyond that, it's anybody's guess. But someday I'll run into that regressive hypnotist and I'll do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I know a couple people that do that. If you want to name, I'm sure you have names of people that can do that. But yeah, that'd be worth a session or two. I imagine. I'd love to kind of transition a little bit into your book. You wrote a book about Roswell, Truth on Trial. This is fascinating to me because lots of people have come at this account looking at a lot of witness testimony and what was going on at the time. You're taking sort of a legal standpoint from this and you're looking at it. What is the credibility of eyewitness? Well, maybe we should start with that. As a lawyer, let's talk about witness testimony. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. And in fact, in my book, there's a section in the back where it's talking about weighing evidence and kind of credibility, right? Because that's what it's all about. So, you know, and I'm glad you pointed out to me, Matt, that this is recorded. What was your specific question again?
So, witness testimony, because let's face it, a lot of the conversation that happens around this topic is witness testimony, right?
Right.
So, some people say, all right, well, that holds a lot of water. Some people are like, well, that's just hearsay. Somebody's saying something. How do you vet somebody? How do you decipher from like one witness to the next? Like, how much weight should we put on these people saying these things?
Sure. And so, okay, so how much weight? And that's a good question. And what the court would tell you is, as a juror, you give it the weight that you think that it's worth, right?
Okay.
So, for example, General Ramey, boy, people would want to give him a lot of weight because, look at him and the medals and the this and the commendations and the this and that. Okay, well, if that's what you think, but then it would be my job to undercut,
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. And then honestly, and then it's up to the juror to weigh the weight of that evidence or that witness. It case by case.
And so a lot of these witnesses, they gave accounts like decades after the fact, right?
Right.
So obviously, if you experience something like this, I imagine this would be pretty burned into your memory. But details are going to become a little bit flimsy, I'm sure, like time of day and who other individuals that were there. So, I mean, how do we? What do you consider good witness testimony decades after the fact? I mean, do you have to look at like specific details of the account? Like, let's pick Walter Howe. Let's
Sure.
talk about Walter Howe, the press officer at the Roswell Army Airfield. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did he give a deathbed confessional?
Kind of.
Okay,
So,
what was his confessional?
well, here was the deal with Hout, and that he's a perfect one to pick because it ties in your question about, memories changing over time and who's saying what when. So Hout, he executed two affidavits, okay, one in 93 and one in 2002. So first of all, the first one is almost 50 years after the event, right? So it,
Hmm.
you know, and as the attorney, you go after him, and your memories don't get better, you know, that whole thing. So he executes an affidavit in 93 about what occurred at Roswell, according to him. 9 years later, so you know, taking into account the memory getting worse thing, and talk about burying the lead, he executes a second affidavit where now he's talking about extraterrestrial bodies, right? So, boy, I will tell you, he, I would love to cross examine, you know, Mr. Hout on that. And there could be a million reasons. And so then again, it goes back to your question of how much weight do you give it? Well, how good of a job does the lawyer do, you know, do addressing those sorts of things? But right, the skeptic, or pardon me, the believers, if you will, would hold up Hout as this great witness. The skeptic's attorney would have a field day with him because of those two different
Because
affidavits.
they're different sort of affidavits. So
Right.
was the last one, did the last one come out when he passed away though? Did he say you can open this when I'm dead?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the exact timing in relation to his death. I know he did say that, and then he's referencing extraterrestrials in affidavit number two. So
Hmm.
circumstantially, it would make sense that was the case. But if there was something yet again different, that I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you're holding on to this nuclear bomb of a statement and you don't want anything to do with it while you're alive, you may say, hey, open this when I'm gone because I don't want to deal with the repercussions of this. I was probably threatened. If this is true, you know, I mean, that's always seemed like the big taboo part of this topic was don't talk about bodies, don't talk about the beings. You know, you can talk about the actual craft, like that, people can wrap their heads around that. But you start talking about entities that are non-human, people get a little squirrely.
Yeah. And you know, and part of my book, part of the push of my book is to get, you know, hopefully people to think a little more critically, you know, do more than just, you know, kind of read the headline and go, oh yeah, that's the deal then. Because for example, to your point with the bodies, a lot of people like to point at Glenn Dennis, who was the mortician there in town. And what the common story out there is, oh yeah, they called up Glenn Dennis and they said they needed these hermetically sealed child-sized coffins, and he brought them out to the base. No, according to Glenn Dennis himself, he didn't have the coffins, but he could get the coffins, is what he
Okay.
reported. Say, but there's a big difference there. And then Mr. Dennis, then he goes, yeah, but I went ahead and went out to the base. Okay, that's a lot different. Some guy who doesn't have the thing that they that he was,
Why is he going to the base?
but yet he's held up as this great witness relative to the bodies, right? So just that's kind of my point. And we see these headlines, we hear the bits and pieces. Well, when you can have a direct exam followed by a cross exam, you know, boom, it's a pretty
You start to
slick,
see a lot of holes.
yeah, it's a slick way to present information.
Yeah, and the other thing we always hear is that like, you know, there's like 600 witnesses. Everybody from the guys that loaded on the low boys to the paper boy down the street who saw them hauling it off. Yeah, I'm sure there are 600 individuals that were in and around that area on that day, but how many of them actually have testimony that's worthwhile, that's really like ironclad that you can corroborate with two other people? Probably not a lot.
Right.
But you know, when you start to get in those numbers, all the little anecdotal stories probably start to add up to something significant that something absolutely happened there, right? And so, what do we know for sure? I mean, do we know for sure that there was like metal recovered and like debris recovered off Max Brazel's farm? That is that 100%?
Yes, that's 100%.
Okay.
I thought you might, and beyond that, virtually nothing else is 100%. We take at face value, something was recovered. Yes, everyone will attest to that. But it be at the very next question, that's where we're off in a thousand different directions. But yes,
Right.
it accepted that something, you know, and that would be even Ramey going, yep, well, weather balloon, no problem, but something crashed, or it could be Marcel, or, you know, even Mac Brazel himself going, yeah, I picked this stuff up, you know, here in the field. But yes,
Mhm.
it was real.
And Major Jesse Marcel is the one in that famous photo with the weather balloon material. And he's got that look on his face like, what the hell am I doing here?
Yep.
This is clearly not the thing.
Yep, right.
And
And back to the witness weight and kind of the good and the bad of it, right? So Jesse Marcel, he also seems, on his face as a pretty good witness for the believers. And however, we know he said in the second photograph where he's holding the stuff that's not the stuff, the reason he was doing it, right? The old following orders. Okay. However, I don't know what the orders were, Matt, but I guarantee you that the orders at the crash site were not to, by the way, take some of this to your house and show it to your family. Okay.
right.
So now that you don't, there's not a lot of attack room on Marcel, but that's the wrinkle. Okay, today you're Mr. Rah Rah order follower, but that day, so
hmm
now you're giving the jury something to think about. But an interesting thing that Marcel did by taking that home, was he created two more witnesses to the stuff. So that's probably, as a lawyer, if I knew that was going to be the outcome, I'd go, yeah, I'll take that. You go ahead and take it home. Right. That's,
Right. Because what did he showed his wife? Did he show his son as
yeah,
well?
help wife and son.
Okay. And so they saw it and he said this is from a crash saucer. The other thing that's suspicious is that we know that they detained, I think, Max Brazel, I think for a couple of days, like away from his wife. And, why? I mean, if this is a weather balloon, why are you detaining the guy there for 2 days? Like, let him go home. He gave you the stuff. And why? And he apparently was notably like uneasy about the whole thing. This is something's very wrong here. He goes, I don't want to deal with this. And
Uh,
so
and
there's a lot of weirdness around that.
yeah, and those facts are the main fact being that Mac Brazel seems sort of annoyed with the whole thing. That's what makes him such an outstanding witness.
hmm
No axe to grind. I can imagine a guy like him, right? He wants to do his thing and do his job, and now he's dealing with this. You know,
Yeah.
that a witness like that on the stand, jurors get that. They like people like that.
They don't, he's just like, guys, I'm the ranch hand here. I don't even think he was the owner of the property. I think he was
No,
hired by a group of people just to kind of manage the property, right? Now he's got this supposedly alien crash debris all over his yard, possible alien bodies there. He's just like, oh my God, like what?
I don't
Like,
get paid enough.
what is this? It's
Right.
like his brain's probably melting because he's just in complete shock. And then yeah, he threw his life through a loop.
Now, on to kind of we might be a bit out of order, but here was a little interesting nugget that I unearthed or came across as I was working on this. So, widely accepted story, right? The materials were taken, they were sent down to Fort Worth, and from Fort Worth, they were sent out to Wright Pat. Time was Wright Field and Patterson. However, so I'm sure you've heard that version of events, and then we get into the mysterious Hangar 18, and that's where they were sent. I started thinking about it and knowing what we know about Wright Pat, it makes sense if you had a crashed UFO, yeah, maybe you would send it to Wright Pat, right, for that sort of technology and those sorts of studies. However, they didn't even have a hospital on base until
For bodies.
1952. So that little angle, I do not buy that. If we had extraterrestrial bodies, you're going to send them to the equivalent, right? The medical equivalent, as Wright Pat is to the tech. So whether it would have been Walter Reed or elsewhere, it wouldn't have been Wright Pat in my estimation. So that proves nothing. That like a lot of research, but it is an
Sure.
interesting. I don't think it's just another thing I think that can't just be packaged up and go, yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and it's not conceivable they could have just sent the wreckage to Wright Pat and then the bodies to Walter Reed or wherever else they were going to go to examine the biologics, if there was biologics. Let me ask you this question,
Yeah.
and you might know this. Around the time, and this is probably hard to prove, but around the time that the thing allegedly crashed, was there a lightning storm? And is that the sort of leading theory that a bolt of lightning hit this thing and then it slowly came down? And then was there a second craft? Am I getting that right?
Yeah. So always the joy of a 70, 80-year-old mystery that's been because I've heard three versions of that. I've heard the lightning storm hit one and it crashed. I heard lightning storm hit one, which caused it to hit another one, and it crashed or skimmed the earth, and then that other one was the actual landed, further south. So I guess it was only the two, but yeah, I've heard lightning hit it and it crashed. Then I've heard lightning hit one into two and it crashed. So, yeah, who knows? But
Okay. So who knows exactly what would happen there, but that's one of the sort of leading theories there. I want to switch the conversation a little bit into disclosure because I'm sure you follow this. And, talking about witness testimony and what we've seen thus far in 2023 with Grush and Fravor and Ryan Graves. And then this past November, I think we had Schellenberger, Lou Elizondo, Tim Gallaudet, and Mike Gold from NASA. We haven't had those firsthand people with their hands on the craft or the bodies yet. The word on the street is that's coming. It's September 9th for the next hearing, which I think is almost confirmed now. How much weight do you put on the testimony of, let's just go with David Grush?
let's see if I can kind of parse these two things apart. There's the man and there's the testimony. Because now I will first disclosure myself. Have I heard every single word of the disclosure hearings? No. However, at all of everything that I've seen and the recaps I've watched and what I've read, he hasn't had any testimony. His testimony has all been hearsay about the 42 guys that he's tied. This is Grush in particular. Now, I should say, yes, we hear. Now, I know some other stuff that I could tell you in the skiff later. Okay. But I'm talking about specifically to Chris Johnston when I'm watching TV or, radio or what have you. As you said yourself, we don't have the people that it's always this one step removed or two steps removed. So all of his testimony was, that I took in was nothing but hearsay. And that's not to say he doesn't know anything. I'm talking strictly the bare bones legal analysis. I heard nothing.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's so unfortunate, right? Because it's always somebody that knows somebody.
Right.
And that's the biggest complaint, I think, from, the person who follows this topic is, where's the guy that held the body in his hand? And then where's the guy that opened up the craft? And so we have people that have come forward and said such things, but it hasn't been under like congressional, it's not on the congressional record. We have guys like James Lakatsky, who was a physicist or an actual rocket scientist who I think he was one of the head guys at ATIP, who said that they had retrieved a craft of unknown origin. And he said they had breached the hull. I think he wrote this in his book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And then he said it again, I think, with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp. And so, but that's not testimony on the congressional record. So my big thing is like, I want to see a guy who marches into Congress, puts this on the congressional record, says it on public TV. To me, that holds more weight. And that's another step in the right direction. For me, but I've also been following this for a long time. I know for somebody else, they're going to I want to see somebody wheel a saucer into the Smithsonian and I want to pay a fee to go see it.
Another kind of a side angle on the whole disclosure thing is, and I'm just going to pick on Lou Elizondo for a minute, but come on, guys, when there's a movement like this and something as serious as important as this, and you're sort of the tip of the spear, you have zero excuse for showing unvetted photographs and passing them off as something. Don't tell me just handed. Don't tell me anything. There's too much at stake and there's too much responsibility to behave like that because it undermines everybody else, that's pushing for disclosure. It's like, more of the same, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I've had this conversation with some friends of mine, and I'm like, and I met Lou. He came to Northeast Florida a few months back, and I actually had dinner with him with some friends, and he is the nicest guy. He's just super nice. He seems like salt of the earth. I wouldn't want to be in his position, like you said, kind of the head of the spear of this. But at the same time, like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you've made a couple. You have a responsibility, right? You are the guy right now that everyone's looking to for leadership, for transparency. and you made that faux pas in DC with showing the I don't even know what it was. It was like a some sort of irrigation thing in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And then he did another one, I think, in Philadelphia during one of his tours. There was
Mhm.
another photo that had been vetted and was a known hoax, and he showed it there. So it's like you got to be very careful
Right.
because the subject is like it's always kind of just hanging on by a thread, and
Right.
and yeah, you got to be careful, and I hope that I hope those things weren't on purpose to push things in a weird direction.
Yeah, and what was it just here within about the last 3 months? There was an article in, was it the Times, about not disclosure, but about misdirection
Wall
and
Street Journal.
that's right. I thought that was really interesting. And one, I guess kudos to, I can't remember who it was in the CIA, but they were right out there going, yeah, we do it. We'll plan information. But I thought what was more interesting is he said, more often than not, we just won't correct information that we know is wrong. He's like, Joe, just let the minions run with it. And they're over here with the real answers.
Yeah, I mean it's a giant mess. I wouldn't want to be one of these guys like Carl Nell or Lou Elizondo or Christopher Mellon who's trying to untangle this 80-year knot of Christmas lights that's been in the attic forever, and you're just trying to figure out a reasonable way to bring information out to. I mean, my vision or my imagination takes me to. There's probably multiple different reasons why disclosure is happening, right? And they've all got their agendas. They're all trying to do this responsibly, but it just seems like such a mess.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to be those guys trying to untangle this knot. It's
Yeah.
just it just seems like a mess. And then at the same time, you have people that are making it more tangled as they're untangling it,
Sure,
you
yeah.
know?
It's true. Yeah. I believe, and as I already said, I'm 55. I believe there will be disclosure in my lifetime. However, I don't think it's going to have anything to do with the US government and anything that
Okay.
we do or don't do. You look at some of these other countries, your Chile's, Peru, France, they are all about, at least it appears to me, disclosure. And hey, we don't have the answers. Here you go, citizens, and just dumping it out there. So I
Hmm.
think we're more likely to have disclosure, either A, something that the extraterrestrials themselves do that can't be ignored, which would be fantastic, or B, another government's just going to, they'll have something and they'll release it and things will tend to roll from there. But I fear a lot of this that we're getting from our government, a lot of lip service, lots of hearings, and we'll see. Hurry up and wait.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't see them ever doing this willingly. The only way I see disclosure happening is if it's either something happens where they get to claw it out of their dead hands because they're not giving this story up willingly. That's obvious.
Right.
And so either they have subpoena power and they treat people as hostile witnesses and it comes that way, or it's going to be another country that just says, "Hey, this we had contact here. We
Right.
had multiple cases here. This is it. This is what we got. These are our documentation. These are our photos." So that could happen, which I think would be kind of embarrassing to the United States, maybe. And then the other option is that you're like you said, non-human intelligence just takes their football field stylist craft
Yeah.
out for a spin over the Super Bowl, and and it's just like it's so big. People are just like, well, that's what the hell is that?
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
right. With my libertarian leanings, that's what I would say. We don't need you, government. Look at they showed us.
Yeah, it is always interesting having the disclosure conversation because, for me, I'm not so sure I need the government to say anything. I'm pretty sure there's something going on. It'd be nice to get like an acknowledgement. It'd be nice to see some more high definition photos and video. But I mean, there's just a tsunami wave of evidence out there. It's pretty obvious that there's something is going on.
And Matt, that's an excellent point too. Yeah, I don't need someone to confirm my beliefs for me to know that it's real, but it would just be that, yeah, that validation, and then or even the validation that we knew you'd been lying to us.
Right. And it's like some people are going to want their pound of flesh, which I don't think will ever come. I just
New.
think, yeah, I just think Yeah, I just think the best you can hope for is that you just have more hearings, more firsthand witnesses, more people in the congressional record. If we're lucky, they'll release some of these like high definition videos and photos, which some people will say they're fake.
Of course.
Um, but you have to consider the sources of where the stuff is coming from. But one more thing, I want to go back to Roswell real quick because I left something out, and this is kind of a trope that's in other landing slash crash cases with liquid metal coming off of craft. Is that so? Is that true that there was some liquid metal coming off of the thing that's on the ground, or how can we confirm or deny that?
I Good question. One thing I didn't mention, all of 90% of the testimony in my book is, so one, I had to use the testimony to tell the story, right? But I took my testimony from previous interviews and statements and affidavits that these folks did. So I didn't make up, it's not Chris saying that they would say this. So in my research, I saw a generalized reference to this, kind of molten metal take, but I never found anything remote to any of the primary or secondary or tertiary players. I think that seems like something that just sort of got picked up and appears in various retellings of this story. So I
Mm.
didn't go that way because I couldn't find anything, close enough to the source material.
That is interesting because that sort of detail does show up in other crash slash landing cases that are kind of famous in ufology. So I was always interested to hear that. Chris, I want to kind of wrap things up here and talk about a new book that you're kind of working on, something that we've covered on this podcast quite extensively, which is the crop circle phenomenon. So is it true you're writing a book on crop circles?
Yeah, the same format, the crop circles, the truth on trial with, witnesses both for and against. It's taking me some time because one thing in my book, the trial procedure in my book is right on, so I'm pretty proud of that. So since most of the crop circles are over in jolly old England, I'm trying to put it in that legal setting, and I actually have to research that, right? This I
Hmm.
can go, then you go to the courthouse and all this stuff happens. So anyway, but yes, so crop circles. It's coming out.
Very cool. What you have to let me know when that one comes out. I definitely want to give that one a read. Like I said, that's one of the things we've covered extensively on the channel. I find it deeply fascinating. I get really into the geometry side of it, at being an geometry instructor. So I
Oh,
love getting into that kind of stuff. So I'd love to see what you come up with. Chris, I really want to thank you. Tell everybody about your book, where they can find you, and what you got coming.
great. Thanks. So again, my name is Chris Johnston. I'm a trial lawyer based here in Des Moines, Iowa, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, my book is Roswell: The Truth on Trial. It's available on Amazon, but my shameless plug, I recommend if you go to my law firm website, which is lawgroupofiowa.com, about halfway down the homepage, you'll see a big red button, a picture of my book. But on that site, my professional bio is also on there, and folks can see that I actually do real lawyer work in my daytime job here. So anyway, and that'd be it. And I always put it out there, Matt or anyone. I'm happy to travel. I do a fair amount of mock trial coaching and whatnot. So if anyone ever wants to see any of these as a mock trial, you know where I'm at.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate it, Chris. We'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for stopping by.